should Christians follow people like Kevin Samuels? That's what we're going to talk about first and foremost on today's live stream video. So for those of you who don't know, let me just give you a quick bio about Kevin Samuels. So from the research I've been able to just gather over the last couple of days, Kevin Samuels is, by his own admission, he calls himself a image consultant, right? But if you watch some of his materials, he goes much deeper than just ultimately one's image. He really and truly, we could classify him as sort of like in the relationship industry, right? He's very popular, it seems, on the internet, on different social platforms, and from what I've gathered, he really digs deep into women, right? What he likes to call the modern woman, and he really gets into like strong alpha males, as we like reference them today, right? So that's just a brief bio. So the reason I'm basically answering this question is because weeks back on a recent Q&A, someone posed this question to me. So I decided to start today's live stream talking about this particular question. So that's a bit of a bio. He's really into relationships. He's into image and presentation and things along those lines. I've heard him talk about how he fixes relationships as well on all of the different kind of things. So feel free as well to put your thoughts of what I'm saying in regards to today's question as well in the chat section. So should Christians follow someone like Kevin Samuels? The way I can answer this question, as I thought about it just in preparation for today's live stream, is it depends, right? That's my honest answer. It depends. And it really depends on one major thing, really and truly, right? So the fact of the matter is, it really comes down to, from my perspective, what you are basically looking for in regards to listening to someone like Kevin Samuels. So obviously, this is a live stream. This is a channel geared towards Christian development, ultimately learning your Bible, applying it out in a day-to-day lifestyle. So let's say, for example, you were looking for someone to teach you the Bible. Would that be a scenario to listen to? Most likely not, right? From what I've seen, he rarely talks about the Bible explicitly. But the point I'm trying to make is, really and truly, it comes down to if there's something he offers, right, that you may feel, you know what, it's worth me following through with. And I want to talk about different things. So we're going to talk about, as I answer this question, his view on like marriage, right, and in regards to stuff like cheating on a spouse and things along those lines, and just other stuff like that as well, right? So this is something I observed from listening to a bit of his material. One thing I'll say is he says this himself, right? He's very educated. I could easily see how a lot of people look at his videos, right? Especially from a Christian perspective, and feel like, you know what? He's just this worldly guy. He's just a outright carnal person who's trying to like get to people's emotions, right? And the interesting thing about this situation is, like, I've heard him say it himself, and just by watching him in like a research, from a research perspective, he's very calculated. And I've heard him say multiple times, he's very calculated. He knows what he's doing. He plans out what he's doing in advance. Now, the reason I say this is because ultimately, again, from a Christian perspective, if you listen to some of the things he's saying, he's talking about relationships. He loves to talk about women. He loves to talk about how men should act, how women should act, etc. And you could just easily make the mistake of thinking that he's just trying to cause a ruckus. He may be trying to cause a ruckus, but why would he be trying to cause that particular ruckus, right? Now, one thing I noticed, and this will be very beneficial for those who are Christians who may be watching already, you would obviously know this, and those who over time may consider watching some of his materials, like seriously. One thing I noticed for myself is there were times when I was watching some of his content and I'd actually have to minimize the screen or not watch what's actually being presented on the screen, because from time to time he did obviously put on screen explicit imagery, right? Whether it be women dressed immodestly and things of that nature, and so on and so forth, right? So if you're a Christian and you may be struggling with certain things, that's not going to be a wise decision to make, right? Because he showcases these kind of things, right? Now, there are clear negatives, and we'll talk about more as we go, but Like, just because we're Christians, that doesn't mean, and this is one thing I want you to realize as well. This applies to people like Kevin Samuels, but other people as well, right? He says a lot of truthful things and a lot of wise things, right? So when I was listening to him, watching his videos, the live streams, etc., there were certain times where I was bopping my head and nodding and saying, yeah, you know what? That's a good point. Or what he just said is actually accurate. And this is something as Christians we find difficult sometimes, when we may not necessarily agree with someone, and we almost get into the point where it's like, you know what, because I don't agree with this particular individual, I can't agree or accept anything they say, he or she says, which is actually true. And that's not really the wisest thing to do, right? We have to be honest as Christians. And he says a lot of like really good, wise things, a lot of practical things as well. So let me give you an example. So one thing I heard, and explicitly, but he says this regularly, right, is basically the concept of, generally speaking to a woman, he'll say something along the lines of, look, why would you have children with a man you're not willing to marry? Now, that's a very wise statement. And we think about this from a Christian perspective. If you think about that question, why would a woman have a child with someone she's not willing to marry? It's a very wise statement, but from a Christian perspective, we already know if we're trying to live a godly lifestyle which is pleasing in God's eyes, a woman who's born again should not have children, right, with a man she's not married to, and vice versa with a man, right? Men should not have children before they're married. Whether you agree with Kevin Samuels and all of the other stuff he does, that is a good, wise, biblical principle, right? And I heard him say that multiple times. Now, again, kind of deeper into that, and for those of you who don't know, it seems like there was a key shift, right? And from what I gauge from what he says, he used to target and deal with men. Now his content, at least on YouTube, is more focused on women, right? So he's really focused, from what I've seen, on women getting married, which again, from a Christian perspective, someone who's consistently talking about women being married, which would apply for men as well, right? Women and men ultimately being married is another biblical concept. There's nothing wrong with women or men getting married. And from a Christian perspective, again, we would want individuals to get married opposed to sleeping around and all of that different kind of stuff, right? So he says some good stuff from time to time. Now, this is something that's actually quite interesting. I've talked about this already, right? And this is where we can start to get to maybe some negatives opposed to what, on top of what I've already said. So we talked about how he's a very educated man, right? If you hear him speak, he speaks well. He has deep range in regards to topics from what I've seen, right? He's a very educated man. So notice one of the things he talks about, and this is quite clear when you watch his content. He knows, and most people know who think about these kind of things, that women are naturally more emotional, right? Most people would agree with what I just said. Women stereotypically are more emotional, right? Men are more logical, they say. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because he knows this, most people know this, and once you understand that concept, if you didn't know that already, and once you watch his content, you can clearly see that he definitely plays into it. Right? He knows that women are more likely to give a certain reaction, and the things he says bring that specific reaction out of women mainly, right? You obviously have some men acted in a certain way, but it's generally women that are ultimately going to act a certain way. So that's obviously something for you to consider as well. He's definitely playing into this. Now, I had a question going into watching his materials, because if a Christian is asking me, oh, look, what do you think about XYZ, right? Whether right or wrong, my first natural assumption or thought would be, yeah, this person's most likely a Christian, but they may be a bit suspect or maybe a bit borderline, etc. Obviously, no one's perfect, but that's the stance I normally try to take, right? So I was watching through his videos intently trying to discover if he's actually a Christian. Now, from what I saw, from what I watched, and I watched a decent amount of hours, he grew up in a church background, right? He frequently mentions that from what I've seen. But I didn't really hear him say he was a Christian until it was actually the last video, I believe, where he said he's a Christian, right? So take it for what it's worth, right? When we're thinking about should we follow someone like Kevin Samuels, who's giving image consultancy, he's giving relationship advice, etc. Is that something is he someone we should look to for advice, right? I want to know, like, first and foremost, is it a Christian? Now, not because, and don't make this mistake, not because you can't learn from someone who's not a Christian, but going back to how I started the answer, right? It really depends. If you know someone's not a Christian, you're most likely not going to get Christian advice from them, right? So if you expect to get Christian advice from him, you're going to get most likely a problem. And I'm actually going to do a video next week on Kevin Samuels again, but a biblical topic in regards to all of this stuff we're talking about. So he didn't seem to me like he was a Christian, right? Just from listening to him. He, like I said, talked about how he grew up in the church. Some of the things he says, which we'll talk about in a moment, kind of had me scratching my head a little bit, wondering this way or that way. But like I said, it was the last video I watched where he said in one video on the phone or whatever, conversation with someone, he said that he was a Christian. So that's something, right? Now, another thing which is actually quite interesting as well, which, again, all of these things I'm talking about are just points I basically jotted down as I was watching his material with certain questions and just thinking about a lot of the stuff he's saying. So clearly, quite clearly, he is focused heavily, from what I've seen, on a black success mindset, right? Now, I don't have a problem with any person talking about success, and I can't say that he falls into the category I'm about to talk about, right? From what I heard, that wasn't necessarily the case. It wasn't necessarily like a race issue, right? But the only thing I would say is, if someone is saying, look, you know what, I want this person to succeed, but not that person to succeed because of like a skin tone, that was where it may be a problem. Now, like I said, from what I watched over regards to his content, he didn't seem to present like, you know what, it was a race thing, but I'll basically leave it at that. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. And this is where Christians need to be very careful. Remember, we've talked so far about explicit imagery that may come up, right? He uses like profanity, right? I could say regularly, right? From time to time, which is another sort of red flag for a Christian to kind of think about, right? Christian who may be struggling with profanity, may be struggling with certain sexual sins, etc. Watching his material, following him, may be a bit difficult. On the flip side, like I said, he's well educated. He gives a lot of sound advice, whether it be in regards to relationships, whether it be in regards to finance, whether it be in regards to like business and just like day-to-day success of a man or a woman. He gives a lot of that, right? No one's disputing that. One thing that stood out to me, in one of the clips I saw, he talked about a 20% man, right? He calls them high value men, right? Basically top tier men, as he likes to describe them. And this is something I thought to myself, okay, this is actually quite interesting. So he basically said he's big on, you know what, staying in your lane. So if you're an average person, go and get with an average person. That's what you basically deserve. And one thing he says, look, you know what, if you're a 20% man, and like, don't go and look for a lesser woman. Wait it out and basically focus on finding someone who is like your peer, so to speak. Now, when I thought about this, I said, you know what, okay, I can see sense in that, right? But then at the same time, this is where, like I said, as Christians, we need to be careful in regards to who we listen to, because he's giving a relationship advice, right? And as a Christian, our ultimate relationship advice should come from where? The Bible, right? And that's not necessarily something we just see explicitly. So it's not a scenario where all the time where someone who may be rich, for example, goes and marries another rich person, right? One of the most famous, if not the most famous kings in Israel, David, he wasn't a rich person, right? He openly talks about himself how he wasn't well off, but he through God's power ultimately ascended to the most important man in Israel. And we see different examples. I thought of an example, and I did a video about this recently, about the man who was a man of God who ultimately married a prostitute, right? A call girl. These kind of scenarios wouldn't happen from what I saw in regards to Kevin Samuels' like ideology. But the point is, the God we serve as Christians doesn't like deal in like partiality in that sense, where, you know what, you're rich, you're super successful, so you can't marry someone who's not successful or someone who's not the most attractive, etc. So that was something that stood out to me. It's sound worldly advice, right? To a certain degree, it could be like entry level, right? Godly advice. But when we think about the context of the whole scripture, right, like that kind of blanket statement, which he seems to kind of preach out, wouldn't necessarily fly unless you're going to start being impartial, which is obviously a sin. Now, one of the big things which I thought was actually quite significant, this was from a few weeks ago, where he was talking about Bill Gates' situation recently with his marriage, and he starts talking about like divorce, and he's talking about cheating. And in this particular session, he continually talked about, look, you know what, these high value men, these like really important men have options. And people are saying, look, you know what, well, that's cheating, like you can't, that's not a good thing, etc. And one thing you need to consider is, like, from a biblical perspective, this is what I thought, right? Again, go back to what I said earlier. When it comes to analyzing things, we have to look at what the Bible says contextually and not just disregard what someone's saying just because we may not necessarily like what they're ultimately saying, right? A lot of women who may have listened to that session may have been thinking, well, like, there's no way I'm going to be in that situation, XYZ, right? I'm not going to be in a situation where they're married, but ultimately their husband's got a mistress or multiple mistresses, multiple wives, etc. Certain men may be like, yeah, like they want that. Certain men may be like, no, they don't want that. But the point I kind of thought of when I thought about this was, look, you know what? We see in the Bible, in the Old Testament, really significant men. I mentioned David before. David had multiple wives. Abraham, multiple wives. Jacob, multiple wives. Many individuals in the Old Testament who were deep men of God had multiple wives, right? So, like, to say, for example, like, look, you know what, like, this is completely foreign, that's something we don't ultimately have to question. Like, no, it's not completely foreign. We see examples of that in the Bible. Now, what we see contextually through the Bible, especially more, again, like reinstated in the New Testament, is that men should stick to one woman and a woman should stick to one man, right? One husband, one wife. So where Kevin Samuels here is talking about multiple women for a man and a man's going to do what a man's going to do, again, like, I was nodding saying, you know what, okay, yeah, that makes sense, but that makes sense from a carnal perspective, not from a godly perspective, where a man is trying to live a godly life, right, and is not trying to like fall into the same pitfalls and turmoils that many men, which I mentioned previously, who had multiple spouses, multiple like concubines, etc., ultimately wound up in different like dramas. So a situation like this is another one, right? He's going to talk about marrying or having a side piece. He's going to talk about, and I've heard him talk about, look, you know what, he's not married, right? From what I engaged from the last couple of videos that I watched, he's been divorced twice. And I know some people will be like, okay, look, he's like suspect. But the thing I just thought about was there's many popular preachers today, men and women, who have been married multiple times, right? And many Christians still listen to them. So think about some of the things you may be thinking and following through with, and like before you say it. But he's talked about sleeping with women, which again would fall into like fornication. Those are certain things which clearly as a Christian we can't co-sign. So we look at all of this information, right? And we say, look, there's these pros, there's these cons. As a Christian, should we follow someone like this? And like I said at the start, from my perspective, right? It depends, but it really depends what you want. If you want Christian advice, no. If you're looking for success, then potentially. But I would say, as a Christian, there's probably someone else who's as successful, if not more successful, who would give you the same thing you're desiring from someone like Kevin Samuels, but not without any of the compromising things he may be presenting in his shows on a day-to-day basis, i.e. Nudity from certain videos he shows, i.e. profanity, i.e. fornication, i.e., multiple wives as a New Testament believer, etc., etc., etc. There's certain things which are going to challenge you, right, as a Christian. Now, listening to multiple hours, like I said, of all of his materials, I kind of sum him up as, from my perspective, he says a lot of wise things, and I would describe him as a good secular life coach. That's how I would sum up listening to him for multiple hours. If someone was to ask me what was my opinion on him, I would say he's a good secular life coach. He gives a lot of good, sound advice for someone who is secular, non-Christian, looking to succeed in life. Now, that doesn't mean that as a Christian, he's not giving you advice in certain aspects that you can use to be successful, right? He is. I've already admitted that, right? But if you're trying to be the best Christian, he isn't going to be the best example for you. So hopefully that helps. Just some of these points I've basically given you. And as is our custom, if this is your first time here, welcome to the channel. My name's Israel. We do this weekly live Q&A every single Wednesday by God's grace, same time, same place. And we typically start with a question. And ultimately now I'm free to answer any questions from the live chat, which I can be of best service to you ultimately as just a servant of Christ. So thank you for those of you who are already here and some of the regular names that I see who tune in. I can see that Jordan Daniel is here again. Thanks for tuning in, bro. And yep, I guess this is the first question, even though it's not Bible related so far. He says, what time is it for everyone? It's 2 p.m. here. So I guess he's in the Pacific. It's 10 p.m. here. It was 10 p.m. anyway when we started here in the UK. And I guess obviously being in America, you know that it's about 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And just before that, in regards to Central Time. Cool. Let's see. I guess this next question here is Jordan Daniel asked, and hey Red said as well, hey Bug Out as well, thanks for tuning in. Hey OKN. Let's see this question. Cool. So Jordan Daniel says, why aren't there more verse by verse format Bibles? I guess Bible studies. This format makes the most sense to me. So why does it seem so hard to find Bibles in this format that aren't KJV? Why aren't there more verse by verse format? I guess, are you talking about study guides, verse by verse studies? Just add more insights to that. Because I guess I kind of thought it was going one way, but it kind of went the other way. Let's see. Bagat says they personally believe, agree with much of Kevin Samuel's teachings for dating and women submitting to their husbands. Heroes talk a lot about the Bible, and he does talk a lot about the Bible and why Christian women shouldn't be feminists. And again, like, I could agree with Bagat, as I've already done in today's session, right? In many ways, he talks about a lot of things which are, in many ways, biblical principles, right? If we're going to be honest to the text, one of probably the biggest things he talks about is a woman who is willing to submit to her husband, right? And that's biblically throughout the whole scripture how God intends for the marriage relationship to succeed. Now, this obviously doesn't mean that a man just takes advantage of his wife. Quite the contrary, right? We've got multiple passages which encourage a man to love his wife like Christ loved the church, to shepherd over and to nurture and take care of his wife. So it's not something where it's like, you know what, you've just got now like a punching bag and you can just manipulate and do whatever you want to your wife. It's actually the opposite. So like Bagat said, Kevin Samuel has a lot of good advice in regards to men and women. I can't agree with some of the extremes, like I talked about previously in regards to his question, in regards to the question about Kevin Samuels. But like I said, he obviously knows that women are very emotional, and he can say certain things which can trigger females' emotions. But that's what I'd basically say in regards to that. But thanks for that comment. Let's see. God's way is the only way says we should follow Jesus and not man, right? All men fall short in some way or another, but God will never. And that's ultimately true, right? We should follow Christ, right? We should follow what God set up for us. But then at the same time, we have to be mindful that God obviously knows, as the comment is basically saying, that we as individuals, we fall short, right? We need people to guide us. We need people to teach us. This is why it's really important for us to find good role models, to find good mentors who can basically push us in the right direction. Just like Paul says, follow after me as I'm following after Christ. Not because Paul wants people to follow him, but he knows he's going on the journey to Christ, and we should all be going in that direction as well. So if you're looking for individuals, right, kind of like what Bug Out mentioned previously, if Kevin Samuels is saying a lot of biblical stuff, right, not everything is biblical. There's certain things which are clearly unbiblical, right, and clearly sinful. It's like I said, we could find someone else who has those same biblical principles, right, but may not even be like a preacher, right, or a Bible teacher or anything along those lines. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Linda Keys is joining us. Thanks for tuning in, Linda Keys. She says she's never heard of him. And until I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I had never heard of him too, right? Like I said, someone asked me about him, and I kind of said to myself, like, the last couple of days, you know what? Let me actually listen to some of his materials. I'm not going to basically give my thoughts on someone without actually hearing or knowing anything about them. So I kind of said, you know what, let me do a bit of due diligence. You know, Proverbs talks about the fool answers before he hears. So I kind of said to myself, yep, I will listen to some of what he has to say, especially since it's a Christian asking me that particular question. So I'm not surprised if there's a Christian who doesn't know who he is, but let's see. Hopefully that helps. Because Miss is joining us and she says she doesn't know him or listen to him either. And it's interesting because one thing I know, like I've realized as well, is things like the live stream, things like doing videos and responding to people's comments who comment on my videos and things like that, engaging with people, is they present certain things to me which, if they didn't, I wouldn't even necessarily be aware of some of these situations. And in a normal situation, I may not necessarily like even entertain or engage certain things, but when we're dealing with fellow brothers and sisters in Christ who may be engaging in certain things, it's going to put you in a position where you have to be able to give sound answers about certain things, right? So I've mentioned this before. The video I'm gonna bring out next week, God willing, is going to be really interesting because we're gonna get into some of the Bible doctrine that Kevin Samuels got into in a particular video that I saw. And why, again, as Christians, we need to be very mindful of who we listen to, especially when it comes to biblical theology and stuff like that. Let's see. Ken says, I've heard Kevin Samuel speak on topics. He usually gives advice on relationships, but it seems geared towards secular people and their relationships, the way he delivers his message. And ultimately, as you've probably heard by now, and that is exactly how, from what I gauged, is what I summed it up in just kind of one statement. He seems like a very good secular self-help person, basically. Very good secular life coach, right? So really and truly, when you think about these kind of situations, there's Christians who will be like, look, you know what? They will never listen to someone like him, right? And I wouldn't fault you for that. But on the flip side, when I was watching some of his material, I could see quite clearly why this would appeal to, at a bare minimum, a certain type of man, right? Someone who doesn't necessarily, someone of a darker skin tone, right? Definitely someone who may not have a lot of good male role models, and someone who's trying to be successful. If you look at those three things, right? And that's quite a sizable number, just a bare minimum in regards to like America. He has an audience right there, let alone if you start dealing with women who may listen to him and be like, you know what he's actually saying is actually true. So listen to him, I could see quite clearly he could be very appealing to certain people. But again, as a Christian, we have to always try and raise the bar to a higher level because we're trying to attain to a higher level through the Holy Spirit. So yeah. And says they don't believe people need to listen to him in regards to Christian relationships. And I would agree, right? If you're going to think about Christian relationships from a Christian perspective, he wouldn't be the guy. Whether he gives good advice in certain aspects or he doesn't, right? The Bible gives us ample insights, and we've got multiple Christian like marriage ministries which are always like are dealing with certain stuff like this, right? So hopefully that helps. Let's see. I just saw a comment which said, okay, and adds more, says he's a smart man, but his content isn't particularly edifying for them, so they don't really watch him right now. But curious to hear my perspective. So hopefully my perspective ultimately helps OKN. Because in that sense, I wouldn't find myself watching him, right? I'd prefer to watch someone else. Too much profanity, too much just unbiblical stuff for me. And yeah, like that alone already, and just some of the nude, immodest stuff that is shown would kind of sign me out. Now, he obviously wouldn't care about that the same way I don't care about that. Why? Because I'm most likely not his audience, right? I believe he knows who his audience is and he dives deep into his audience. And as it's been said already, and as I realized for myself, his audience isn't like, he isn't making content for Christians, right? Kevin Samuels makes content for a certain type of person, and that certain demographic isn't a Christian. He only, from what I've seen, brings up being raised in church or being a Christian or anything like that, or believing in or saying things from the Bible when someone who may be a Christian or professes to be a Christian comes on his program. For the most part, people that were talking on his show were not saying they're Christians or anything like that, so he didn't really talk about that. But he's willing and ready to bring that up at some point anyway. So Ikozmir says, oh wow, he's not married all this time. I guess she assumed. And ultimately, that was one of the things I had first and foremost when I was watching his videos, because obviously he's talking a lot about women, and then as you watch him, he's talking about relationships. So from that perspective, it's kind of like, well, is this guy married? Is he not married? And yeah, it was one of the last videos where I heard, I think someone was calling him out saying, look, he's been divorced twice or he's been married twice. And he was just like, yeah, he's been married twice and he's got good advice based on those particular experiences. Hopefully that helps. All right, cool. So this is the next question, and again, ladies and gentlemen, we started with Kevin Samuels. You can add more questions, biblical related, Bible related, in regards to him, or we can move to somewhere else. I don't mind, right? This is basically the weekly live Q&A for you. So questions you have, I'll answer to the best of my abilities. The next question we have here is from Ecosmius, and she says, can people still make Nazarite vows today? So are they still applicable? So for those, just for the record, first and foremost, who don't know what a Nazarite vow is, a Nazarite vow was a vow, right, that a man or a woman could make, right? Most people don't know it's a man or a woman could make, where they basically separated themselves to God. You can read more about this in the fourth book of the Bible, Numbers chapter 6 is the main like Bible related passages in regards to this particular topic, and it talks about the man or woman not cutting their hair, abstaining from wine and strong drink, not being next to dead bodies, etc., and all the like multiple different things, right? And a popular Nazarite from the Bible is someone who most people know was Samson, very big and strong, etc., and had ultimately problems. So that's what a Nazarite vow is. Read number 6. You can read Judges 13 and some other passages as well, which talk about a Nazarite vow. Now, to get now to the particular question, more specifically, now we've covered that, can people still make Nazarite vows today? I would say yes, people could still make Nazarite vows today if they so choose, right? And again, just last thing I'll say in regards to the Nazarite vow as well is, at the end of the vow, you would basically cut your hair, which you hadn't cut for your vow, and basically it would be part of like an offering in one way, shape or form. Now, that's where it may get a bit technical and a bit difficult for you today, in regards to keeping a Nazarite vow. Now, the reason I'm not saying like no to a certain degree is because we see an example in the New Testament, in the book of Acts. We see that Paul and some other men seem to take part in a Nazarite vow where they basically didn't cut their hair and are basically being set apart for a season. Now, obviously, at the end of that Nazarite vow, you would basically go and make an offering at the temple. This is why I just said a moment ago, it would be very difficult because there's no temple standing today in Jerusalem. So that would be where you'd find difficulties. You can decide, you know what, you want to not cut your hair, you want to abstain from wine, strong drink, and all of those different kind of things. You don't want to go around a dead body and things along those lines. But then at the same time, at the end, you're not going to be able to physically, which is, I guess, the key thing here, like finalize that transaction. So one thing I'd say is you could do it if you wanted to. There's nothing saying like, no, you cannot. Paul did it, like I said, it seems, from Acts. And it wasn't something like he was doing because he needed to do it to get saved. He did it freely. He made the choice at the request of James, the brother of the Lord. And he basically went through with it. So it was just an act of love on his part, it would seem, and he did it. So that was after Christ had died and had resurrected. So it's clearly into the New Testament, New Covenant period, and he did it. So you could do it, but at the same time, the end is going to be where you may find it a bit tricky. Let's see. Cool. Thanks for that question as well, because Linda Key is here with a good question. She says, do I think that Queen Vashti was the first feminist? And then she says she would have sided with her. So I guess it kind of put me on the spot there, because if I say yes, then I'm kind of saying you're a feminist. But what would I say to that? No, I don't think she was the first feminist, but that's not because of your implications, right? I would say she's not, because I think there was an example before. There's most likely examples before, right? So Vashti is from the book of Esther, and there's most likely, I can't think of an example right now, right? But there's most likely examples mentioned explicitly in the scripture of a woman who's basically just like on a crazy one in regards to like feminism. To kind of get deeper into the scenario, for those, and again, this is my mistake, for those who don't understand or don't know this particular situation, this is from the book of Esther, Esther 1 and 2, right? Middle of the Old Testament, thereabouts. And Vashti, was a queen who was married to the king of the day, right? And the king was having this big feast. He was basically showing off all of his stuff. And he kind of said, look, you know what? He wants to show off his wife. Now, the woman, Vashti, this queen, said she's not going. She's not going to go and basically be lauded and celebrated as, look, this beautiful woman. So basically what they did at the time, they said, well, if this spreads around that the king called his wife and she didn't come, all of the women, all of the wives around in different regions are going to think it's acceptable not to obey their husbands, not to be submissive, not to respect their husbands, etc. So a decree, she basically becomes banished. She's banished, and they get he looks for a new wife, and that's ultimately how Esther, who was a Jew, becomes the queen of that secular nation. So do I believe she was the first feminist because she didn't go? Not necessarily, right? You can abstain, you can dissent from a decision because you think that decision is ethically wrong or for whatever reason. And that doesn't necessarily make you a feminist. If it was something that, like, the question really becomes, does a wife have to listen to everything a husband says? I would have to say no, right? So that in itself, but bear in mind, these were two secular individuals. So according to their law and their customs, she was a feminist, right? That's why they basically brought that decree, because under their guise and their situation, she had to listen. And her not listening to any command, even if it was the king saying, look, come and present yourself so I can show you off to all of these people, her act of rebellion was a feminist act. It was a no, I'm not going for whatever reason. So that's what I'd basically say. It was a bit, it's not necessarily two Christians or two believers at the time who are like, look, you know what, this is the situation. So that's what I'd basically say. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, Because Mios follows up, I guess, with another Nazarite question. She says, can Nazarites drink alcohol other than fermented grapes, so plum wine, beer, cherry wine, rhubarb wine, etc., since they are not from the grape family? Really, I would say, like, no, I don't think so, because Numbers 6, other places as well, talks about not only wine, but also strong drink. So, like, I don't like fermented grapes. I would like, that's not the only, from my understanding, to make alcohol or to make a strong drink. So think about like today, for example, something like caffeine may be something like Red Bull, energy drinks may be classified as, to a certain degree, as strong drink, and they may even be things which are not, from my understanding, alcoholic, but they have caffeine in it, which is a stimulant to a certain degree. That would be potentially categorized as a strong drink. I know some people, even just going back to some when I was like first years of salvation, I remember I used to debate with some of my Mormon friends, right, who I went to school with, and I remember Mormons don't drink a lot of the time caffeine and things along those lines, because they categorize it as strong drink. So all alcoholic beverages and strong drink as well, whether it be from the grape or other places. Even in number 6, it talks about different different things. Ultimately, I can just show it to you quickly just to give you a little bit of the flavor. But yeah, it talks about different things, which I think are actually quite significant, not just wine, etc. So you can see here, let me show you. It talks about wine, strong drink. It talks about vinegar. It talks about any liquor of grapes or moist grapes or dried grapes, right? So it talks about eating nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. It goes into a couple of different examples there. So wine and strong drink would apply in both scenarios, and it doesn't necessarily have to be from the grape family. Thanks for the question. Let's see. Red Z says Red Z here is joining as well. Thanks for tuning in. He says he thought the Amazons were the first feminists, right? Let's see. Linda said Vashti she forgot to put on the show. All right, next question. Torah for today says, when Paul says God is glorified by his lie, how is that possible? So I guess the question presupposes certain things, and the thing the question presumes is that Paul is saying something which he didn't say. So this is a common question that comes up, a common attack on Paul which comes up from multiple different people who believe and present that Paul was basically saying a lie. This is in regards to Romans chapter 3 verse 7. Now, if you just read the context, Paul isn't saying he's lying. He's saying people are saying that's what he's doing. But I've got a whole video on that particular topic. If you want to watch that now or after or at any time in the future, it will basically help you with that. Paul wasn't saying God was glorifying his lie. He was saying people think you can do evil and good will come of it, and we shouldn't be judged because of that. And he says, God forbid, that's what people are saying about him, etc. So when Paul says God is glorified by his lie, how is that possible? It's not possible, because that's not what Paul was saying. Hopefully that helps. Let's see. OKN asks, they've been thinking about confidence and not worrying. Would it be a biblical conclusion to be confident due to knowing that God loves you and others? And to get rid of fear by just placing it in God's hands? It really just depends, right? Firstly, Timothy talks about not having a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And sort of some of the things OKN has mentioned would obviously help you move away from unnecessary fear and move more into a powerful mindset, and a loving mindset and a sound mindset, right? So yes, in many cases, sometimes this helps me quite a bit when I may be struggling with something, I may be worried about something here or something there, and I say, you know what, just relax. At the end of the day, God's in control, right? You see crazy stuff happening in the media, you see crazy things happening worldwide, right? And you can turn around and say, you know what, yeah, stuff may be crazy, but what we believe in like overcomes all of this stuff. So no matter what happens to us, no matter what happens in the world, we believe that God is in control and God will basically take care of the situation. Even if things get very bleak, even if things are bleak, the Bible prepares us for hardships. The Bible prepares us for trials. And from that perspective, sometimes laying it just at God's feet, metaphorically speaking, is the right thing to do. But then at the same time, we have to be wise. So it really comes down to the specific thing we're basically talking about. Sometimes it's not necessarily just about putting it in God's lap, because God has empowered you and given you insights about how you should basically manage a particular situation. And because we decide to mismanage things certain times, we basically mess up, we do things wrong. Now we put ourselves in a position where we're basically struggling, etc. So hopefully that helps. Bagal asks, was Jezebel a feminist? And that's a good example, right? I said earlier, pretty much, right? Esther is obviously middle of the Bible. Jezebel would fall as an example of someone earlier in the book of First Kings who clearly was on, to a certain degree, right? Not like the view of like many feminists, like stereotypically today, are not married, right? The way the day and age we live in today, many women who are feminist may not necessarily be married. They may be single. They may even be attracted to the same sex, etc., and things along those lines in today's day and age. That isn't to say it wasn't like that before, but Jezebel was ultimately married, but she kind of initiated a lot of her stuff from her position of power, right, and things along those lines. Another example is a woman. This that comes to mind again. This is from Kings as well and Old Chronicles. The queen for a season, a woman named Athaliah. Now she ultimately took control over the kingdom and was running the kingdom until I believe it was, is it Josiah or Jotham? One of those. I'm definitely sure it was a J. Basically took the kingdom at a young age, about 6 or 8 years old, something along those lines. Yeah, about that, right? So there are definitely feminist women in the Bible who are on a crazy one, don't accept men, don't respect men, or try to usurp a man's authority and things along those lines. Definitely before any situation like Vashti may have even occurred, even though I don't think from a biblical perspective she may have been a feminist. Vashti, that is. Let's see. Ecosmere says the daughters of the Zelophehad, they could be classed as feminist. Why? That's what I would say. I'm not sure why Ecosmere may say that. I can't think of anything right now which may be considered feminist about what their situation, what we know about them in the Bible, but that'll be interesting to hear. Murray is joining us. Thanks, Murray, for tuning in. Hope you're doing well. Let's see what else we have. Cool. Brandy's here as well. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you're doing well. Linda Key says she's definitely not a feminist. I guess that's what God has decide, right? But right, a wife isn't an ornament, and you know the thing is, it's like, it's interesting when you think about like a statement like that, because when I was actually answering the initial question, I was thinking to myself, you know what? Some women would love being showcased by their husband. Oh, look at my wife, she's so beautiful, etc. Some women wouldn't like it and would be like, no, like, I'm not this trophy that you basically just shine around and let everyone see, etc. So it's actually quite interesting. Let's see. Cool. All right, Murray asks, considering the Bible mentions female prophets, leaders, and members of the early Christian church, both helping financially and in leadership, how do we reconcile this with 1 Timothy 2:12? So 1 Timothy 2:12, let's go there. It talks about Let me just bring it up. It talks about, as you can see, it says, this is Paul writing when he says he suffers not. So he doesn't allow a woman to teach, nor to usurp, nor to exercise authority over the man, but to be in silence, right? And it goes into his example of Adam and Eve. So let's go back to the question and think about this in regards to a passage from Paul here, where from the line we read, he's talking about he doesn't allow a woman to teach or to usurp authority over a man. So considering the Bible mentions female prophets, leaders, and members of the early Christian church, both helping financially and in leadership, how do we reconcile this with 1 Timothy 2:12? So firstly, right, one thing I'll say first and foremost is context. That's what we have to focus on. So Paul's obviously talking about a specific context in 1 Timothy, right? That's obviously just a given to any passage in the Bible. Now we know this because Paul's not saying a blanket statement, women should not teach. Why? Because we know from passages like Titus, which is another one of Paul's letters, where he's talking about women teaching in a certain context, right? As Murray's basically brought up, there's examples, right, of female prophets, even from the Old Testament, Miriam, Deborah, there's multiple different examples. You've got Anna, who was basically would fall under the Old Covenant, but she's from the New Testament, right? Luke's gospel account. You have other people, right, who supported financially, as is explained. So it really just comes down to the context. Paul talks about in Corinthians, right, women prophesying, etc. So it wasn't like a blanket statement to a woman not to teach, but contextually, what's he talking about? Since we're talking about the whole concept of men and women relationships today and submission here and there, that's the context in which Paul is talking about in 1 Timothy to a certain degree. He's talking about just the roles in regards to a husband and a wife, man and woman, etc. So he wasn't saying just flat out women cannot teach, right? That would be more so in regards to just an authority structure from the way I kind of see it. But I don't have a video on this particular topic specifically. I've thought about it from time to time of doing a video, and I'm pretty certain I'll do a video at some point in the future. But that's how I'd basically reconcile them. Firstly, it's always about context. Think about the context of whatever passages you're trying to reconcile, and the context will generally kind of give you the answer. And that's what I'd basically say. Yeah, hopefully that helps. Let's see. Cool. All right. Brandy asks, what are your thoughts on a pastor who is a woman who has gotten a plastic surgery on her body and her daughter has followed? What could you say to her, but in concerning and loving, what could you say to her, but in a concerning and loving way? So this is something I've thought about on and off, right? Plastic surgery, the health and beauty industry, etc. Body enhancement, all of this different kind of stuff, right? I thought about this from time to time. So what would I say about a situation like this? So when I thought about this, I've kind of always considered to myself, look, you know what? Why would a woman or a man, for that matter, get plastic surgery, right? There's always a reason why people do something. So a woman or a man's going to get plastic surgery. This particular question is about a woman. Why? Because maybe they feel like, you know what, something needs to be fixed, right? Maybe they are insecure about something and they need to basically fix that insecurity. Maybe they're vain, right? They're given into vanity, and you know what, they think, you know what, I need to look the best because I want everybody to look at me, etc., and be like, you know what, that person's so beautiful, all of those different kind of things. So I think about those kind of things. Now, based on where you fall on that spectrum, you may get a different answer. But my conclusions up until this point in regards to like cosmetic surgery and all those different kind of things is it like just outright wrong? I don't know if I can say that, but I do know that from an individual perspective, we have to put ourselves in a position where we're kind of like, we don't only think about ourselves, but we think about others and how others perceive us. So in a situation like this, I'll just engage with a particular individual and just seek information. What do you think about it? Why did you do it? What was the reason, etc. And things along those lines, right? Popular preachers today, popular Christians in Christian circles have clearly plastic surgery. Is that in itself like damnable to them? Not necessarily, but it just poses a question why. So based on how they answer is how I would basically potentially respond if I was engaging in that kind of question. If they were just like, look, you know what, they want to look their best, etc., then like how much can you really say in return? The main thing I generally think about in regards to that kind of stuff is the financial cost, right? If you have loads of money, disposable income, then that's going to be a different kind of decision for you to someone who's struggling financially, right? Or doesn't have the means. So in a situation like that, if you have the money, you have that decision to make one way or the other. If you don't have the money, theoretically, you really shouldn't be making that kind of decision. If your financial situation changes, then you can ultimately switch it up. If they're like, look, you know what, they're vain or whatever, then that's a whole different kind of conversation. But that's what I'd basically say. Many people, like I said, have it. Christendom, non-Christendom, and there's different reasons why different people have it. Hopefully that helps. Let's see. Ikazumia says that reminds her of Joyce Meyer, who has spoken openly about her plastic surgery. She hasn't watched the videos, but she knows she's had some cosmetic procedures, and yeah, she comes to mind. Yeah, that's what I'd say. Let's see. Jordan Daniel asks, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? So what does it mean to be made in the image of God? From my understanding, being made in the image of God is God giving us a certain level at bare minimum of consciousness, right? Which animals don't have, right? We can think to a certain degree, we can reason, we can relate in a certain way, we can understand at least conceptually in a way that like animals can't in regards to a creator, things along those lines, right? So I don't necessarily believe this, you know what, in eternity, like God is like a man physically, and God's like, you know what, I'm gonna make a man and a woman, etc., like that. I don't think it's necessarily like a physical thing in and of itself. It's more so the relational kind of manner that we have, and we're made in the image. We can understand and perceive certain things on a level which God hasn't given to any other sort of being or creature. So that's what I'd say, just loosely thinking about this right now. Let's see. Murray and Brandy both said thanks for tuning in. Let's see, thanks for the questions. Red Z asks, and again, put your questions in the chat section, ladies and gentlemen, feel free. Have you heard about the woman pastor who preaches with her chest out? Is she being a feminist or using God's word to tempt men? So I believe I have heard of that particular situation. I haven't watched any of those videos, I believe, but I did hear about that. I think I've had a couple of conversations about that previously in the past. Obviously, the Bible clearly talks about women dressing modestly. So if a woman, let alone a professing preacher, pastor, whatever, right, someone who's saying, look, they're working for God in that sense, is doing those kind of things, that's obviously suspect, right? And there's something that she shouldn't do. And is she being a feminist and using God's word to tempt men? Well, maybe to a certain degree, but at the same time, the congregants that listen to her are freely choosing to go there or not to go there, right? If they're of a certain age. So they can decide to go or not to go. It's kind of like what I was talking about earlier in regards to like people like Kevin Samuels, right? You can go and listen to him as a Christian and he's going to give you a lot of good sound advice. But what you're going to find is pretty much with every show of his you watch, there's going to be multiple scenarios where he's saying something which is contrary to what we're supposed to believe as Bible believers. And that's where you're going to be challenged. And again, it just comes down to, look, are those 1-2 things worth, or are those benefits that he may give you financially, socially, mentally, etc., maybe even a little bit of spirituality in there, on the odd show he talks about faith, etc., is that all going to be worth the potential temptations and like compromising things he may say to your faith in so you listen to him, right? Some people are going to say yes. Like, some people are clearly going to be like, no, you know what, I'm struggling in this area and hearing this stuff isn't going to help, or this thing is clearly unbiblical. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to put myself in that particular situation. This is where we get into stuff like what, like I said previously, is this like, he's not the only person in the world. There's many successful men, there's many successful women out there for many of us to learn from. So even if you want to say, look, he's a successful darker colored person, like, so what? There's many darker colored successful people you can learn from, men and women, right? Who may not necessarily deliver things in the way he ultimately delivers stuff. But let's see. Brandy says she thinks we should understand that to some extent the churches have been infiltrated. Some of these pastors could be working for the enemy. And let me even just like, it's not some extent. The churches in many cases have been infiltrated, right? And there are clearly pastors and clearly ministers, right, who the Bible talks about it, who appear as an angel of light, right? Paul wasn't going to write in Corinthians that don't be surprised, marvel not, don't marvel that the angel appears as that the devil appears as an angel of light. An angel of light is something that physically looks good, right? But that person's trying to destroy you. This is why we need to be mindful, and this is why I always say over and over again, it's about lining everything up with the Bible. We always have to get back to that position of, look, you know, what does the Bible say? Contextually, what does the Bible say? I don't want to just hear what this person's saying or what that person's saying. I want to swim in the scriptures on a day-to-day basis and really understand. So when I hear, for example, Kevin Samuel say certain things and say, you know what, this is what the Bible says, or the Bible doesn't say something, I want to know, like, is that true? Is that not true? Right? And I mentioned before multiple times, I'll mention it again. I'm going to do a video for next week, God's grace, right, which will get into an example like this. And this is why it's important. So there are definitely many people infiltrating churches and things along those lines. Let's see. Linda Key says, one lady minister said in regards to ladies' top dress, if you can see the parting of the waves, it's too low. And it's true, right? There's different tests you can do. These are the kind of things like I think about, and I like to say, like, you've got the bend over test, right? You've got the bend down test. You've got the like squat test, and people may not know what those are, but it's like, look, if a woman's getting dressed, you know what you should do is you should bend over, as if bend over to bend forward. You may try and reach for something on the floor. You may squat down and try and do certain things, right? You may reach up and stretch. Why are we doing those kind of things? Because number one, these are different ways you can check yourself, right? You can, you know what, do the pinch and pull test. You pinch and you pull. When you do this as a woman and a man, does your garment, is it loose enough that it can come off? You know, certain women and certain men, they're wearing tops, they're wearing dresses, they're wearing different things, which you pinch it, you can barely pinch it, and if you start pulling it, you might actually nearly think about ripping that particular garment, right? So there's multiple tests we can do as men and women. And yes, if you can see certain things on a woman and on a man, that is very problematic. Like, look, it's no surprise. We live in a day and age, we live in a society where a lot of crazy stuff goes on, right? A lot of the standard of dress has plummeted heavily, right, in many areas, even in Christian circles. And that stuff's not gonna, the only way that kind of stuff changes is when you have men who are mentoring younger men and you have women who are mentoring younger women about how to behave, how to dress, etc., and giving them these kind of insights. When you tell a female, when you tell a man, look, you know what, bend over, and they bend over and you can see their bottom, right? You can see the lines from behind, or you can see, as Linda said, you can see the parting of the waves and stuff like that. You're not getting dressed bending over. You're getting dressed most of the time standing up or sitting down. And those are very stationary situations, right? Another thing you can do is you can do the fan test. Some people, you can call it the Marilyn Monroe test, right? Or whatever you want to call it. Here's what you're wearing. Let's say, for example, like a skirt or a dress. Under heavy wind, will it blow up and reveal stuff that you don't want it to reveal? Now, this is wisdom, right? This is the kind of stuff we should think about before we leave the house. When we're getting dressed, even before we're getting dressed, we should think about these things. But you know what? These are the things we're going to have to talk about where, you know what, the world is going to say, look, you look good in this. No one's saying, to a certain degree, at least from a carnal perspective, no one's saying you may not look good in these kind of situations, right? But is that the most godliest thing to do? That's where we find ourselves in predicament. Because when it says, or should we say the level of undress, right? Redzer says the bend what? Look, you can do the bend test, right? I hope I've kind of explained it already now, right? But you bend over. So when you're getting dressed as a man or a woman, you bend over front ways, you bend over, like you can go sideways, you can squat down. You do all of these different things to see how your clothes react to what you're doing. These are just mirroring, they're copying, mimicking certain actions you'll do unconsciously a lot of the time when you're out and about. You know what? Excuse me. You're walking down the road and your wallet, your purse drops onto the floor. You instinctively say, I'm going to reach down, right? And what happens to your t-shirt, your top, your dress, your skirt, your leggings, whatever it is you're wearing, what happens to them? And those are the kind of things we need to obviously think about. And again, it's not going to be the most appealing to many people today, because why? Many of us as Christians, as non-Christians, what do? We spend a lot of our time watching things which do what? Promote this kind of lifestyle. This again, and God is obviously in control. He's on the throne. He knows what he's doing, right? This links into what I was talking about earlier on in regards to things like Kevin Samuels and watching his kind of materials. Because what? He's going to talk about certain things. He's going to talk about things in a certain way. And like I said, they may be wise in many ways, but at the same time, there's compromising stuff from a Christian perspective that you're going to be listening to. So he may not think, you know what, a woman wearing a certain kind of dress is an issue. Whereas a Christian who's trying to live right, a man or woman, may look at a certain dress and be like, you know what, this is ungodly. This isn't what we should ultimately be doing. Let's see. Mike Brown says Kevin Samuels has taken over Black YouTube, and I'm not surprised at those kind of statements. Obviously, for me, I just looked at his videos over the last couple of days, really just to kind of have some sort of understanding before I answer today's question. But I'm not surprised, because I mentioned this earlier. The way he presents himself, I could clearly see how many young, darker colored males especially could be very attracted to his message, because he has and portrays to have things which many up and coming individuals would desire. So I'm not surprised. But yeah, that's where we have to differentiate. Like, not every young person is a Christian. Not every young person is not a Christian. So that's what I'd basically say. But thanks for that comment as well. Let's see. Randy says, especially for the youth's sake, many are not dressed appropriately, and it's true, right? The younger follow the older in many cases. So if you see a lot of older people dressing a certain way, especially as you get older women and older men who are still trying to like live that kind of lifestyle, like they make it worse for the younger people coming up. Let's see. Many parents, Brandy says, are not correcting their teenagers and nowadays even preteens. And like it's true. And what I said is like holds true. And look, I say this about myself. Certain things I want to do, right? I don't do sometimes because I'm like, look, you know what? I need to be an example for my sons, right? And this is the same thing I say to my wife. And I don't say things to my wife which I don't try and stick to myself. I say, look, you know what? We have a daughter, and whether you like it or not, she is learning mainly from you, right? She's going to mimic you. So what you do is a example to her. The same way, what I do, whether I like it or not, is going to be something my sons are going to try and mimic from me. So if I, for example, walked out on the streets every day or whatever, topless, right? Just because it was hot. If my son started doing that and they go up and started doing that, I wouldn't don't be surprised. If I go around, you know what? And let's say, for example, if I go around and I'm wearing the tightest of tees, or I'm wearing a tight tank top, whatever. So you can see all of the muscles and all of that stuff, right? Yeah, because I want to look good. And I want people to look at me and be like, yeah, like he's ripped or whatever. Like, bear in mind your sons, younger brothers, younger siblings, nephews, etc., are looking at you. That's how it works. So the Bible talks about this, and I mentioned it earlier, right? Titus talks about older women teaching younger women, older men being an example for younger men. We have to be an example. And many, just to add again to Brandy's point here about parents not supporting properly their teenagers and preteens, they're doing the complete opposite in many cases, where they're encouraging that sort of behavior. So it's gone beyond just encouraging that kind of lifestyle. And that happens in many ways. You can do it through your lifestyle, where you're encouraging a certain type of behavior. But you can also do it through what you allow, right? So I know certain people allow their children to watch certain stuff which is not appropriate. And if we know there's a lot of materials out there in the secular sphere which are promoting ungodly dress, ungodly mannerisms, on ungodly speech, don't be surprised when your children, people that look up to you, start saying certain things, start acting a certain way. It's because that's what they've ultimately been trained into. So hopefully that helps. Good comments here as well. Let's see. All right, Mari asks, when Jesus says the Father is greater than I in John 14:28, is he comparing his human side or his divine side? If the latter, does this mean the Father is greater than the Son in the Trinity? It depends what you're talking about, right? So if you, in regards to the last part about is it within the Trinity, it depends if you're talking about substance, nature, right? Trinitarians would say no. If you're talking about role, right, then you hear many Christians say yes, right? There's a hierarchy, not of essence or nature, but just in the roles that they take, etc. So you may hear those kind of things. In regards to John 14:28, I don't believe that's a passage which Unitarians, Muslims, different people who are against Jesus' deity will basically try to use. There's clear problems with that particular passage. But I did a live stream, funny enough, a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago actually now, talking about this particular passage. If you just type in John 14:28 in that word, my video will probably come up, but there's I'm sure there's other videos on that particular topic which basically teach the same doctrine as well. But he's not talking necessarily about hierarchy in regards to like essence or substance. Because if you look earlier in the text, I believe it's verse 11 or verse 12, he talks about the disciples doing greater miracles than he did. Same Greek word. So what would actually that would imply, if you try to follow that, is that Jesus was saying that the disciples were going to do greater miracles than Jesus, which we know is not true, right? So again, it goes back to the context. Think about the context of the passage, and hopefully that helps. Let's see. All right, cool. Next question by Bug Out. They ask, what is my forecast for the United States of America in the coming decades? They personally see decline and financial collapse. What do I think about America? There's so much stuff people are saying today in regards to America. America's Babylon, America's this, America's that. I don't know if America will see financial decline to a financial collapse. Can it collapse? I don't necessarily see that. It's not impossible, obviously, but America's a very big place. The bigger a place is, like, the harder it is for a big, well-established situation to kind of crumbling down. They obviously could. It really just depends what happens, right? If you start talking about nuclear war and all of these different kind of things, who knows what can happen, right? But from my understanding, America's had a huge, like, a financial deficit for a long time, and they've been able to thrive in many ways still. So from where I kind of see it, what America offers the world is so appealing to the carnal nature, to the carnal person. It's hard to see them going anywhere like anytime soon. Because if you think about it, America is a hub for like the whole world in regards to entertainment, in regards to finance, etc. All of these different things, right, in the western side of the world, and even in the eastern side of the world, right, in Africa, America has a big influence, and an even bigger influence in the Middle East and like Asia, right? America has a big influence, and it's a bigger influence, right? So that Western ideology that most of us have grown up with and lived in and continue to live in is ingrained across the board. So because of that, and because America is such a big place, it's hard for me to kind of see it. Obviously, if God's going to intervene, which many people think will happen at some point, which is not like too far-fetched, then obviously God can do whatever he wants to do with America and things along those lines. Yeah, a lot of people talk about America's not mentioned. Why isn't America not mentioned in end time prophecy? This is where we get to people who talk about America being Babylon or America being wiped out before the end times. Right? Whatever you believe about this particular situation, America is like successful. And what I mean by that, like I've explained, is it's successful from a worldly perspective. There's a lot of godly stuff that goes on there, right? But there's a lot of worldly stuff. And because it's so big, you can get the best of both worlds. That's one of the things about America that's always kind of been like, I have, I've always, like, for a long time, had an intrigue about America, right? Because growing up in the UK, and one of my brothers went to live in America for a good amount of years when I was younger. I've had a draw to America, right, for years. But the reason I say it's because it's easy for someone raised in the UK to look at America like, you know what, America's like the bigger and better like UK. And in some senses that's right, but in other aspects, like I remember when I got saved, I was thinking to myself, well, UK, like the UK has a lot of stuff similar to America, but it doesn't have that the extremities of just the wicked crazy stuff that goes on. And that's just merely just because America is so much bigger, right? Imagine if the UK was the size of America, it would be probably just as bad, if not worse. So who knows? But that's what I'd basically say. Thanks for the question. Mike Brown asks, and again, thanks for tuning in. I think this is your first time here, at least commenting on the live stream. Thanks for the question as well. Let's see. It says, they don't think that Kevin Samuel is religious, so he's not going to talk about the Bible topics like that more. Yeah, it's true. We talked about that already pretty much. He says he was raised in the church. He talks about one thing that's actually interesting, right? Maybe I'll talk. Let me know anyway in the comment section if I should talk about this. He said something really interesting about churches and his marriage, except one of his marriages. So if you want me to talk about that, I'll bring it up, because I actually thought that was actually quite interesting. Heard of that today. Let's see. Cool. Jordan Daniel asks an interesting one, a nice one. He says, what are some of your favorite verses for apologetics, evangelism, inspiration? That's a good one. So what are some of my favorite verses for apologetics? It really depends. Firstly, like in regards to apologetics, it's what am I defending in regards to what the Bible says, or what something in the Bible. It depends. There's a lot of passages depending on whatever topic it is. So certain times there's claims that people make, and certain things in the Bible just debunk it. So I remember when I did a video, I think it was last year, it was about God's view on child sacrifice, and people were talking about God wanted child sacrifice, and someone said something along the lines of, you know what, God didn't mind child sacrifice. God didn't want the Israelites to sacrifice to other gods, but he wanted it to himself. And it was like, in the video I talk about different passages, but the like knockout blow comes in Deuteronomy, and it was just a passage where it was Deuteronomy 12, where God is just like, look, I don't want you to do any sacrifices. Like, it's detestable. And like verses like that, sometimes it really just depends on the claim that's made. When someone makes a claim, there's always going to be a verse or two which just debunks it and blows it out of the water. In regards to like evangelism, let me think. Evangelism passage like you're like letting your light shine, right? Don't let your salt lose its savor, things like that. In Matthew, passages like that I think are very powerful. What else in regards to evangelism? You've got the obviously popular ones, popular passages. 1 Peter 3:15 comes up a lot in regards to like apologetics and defending. But yeah, like I said, it really just depends what the topic is in regards to apologetics. Evangelism, obviously John 3:16 is a powerful one. What else? I know someone asked me recently about a passage in regards to mourning. I gave them a passage in Revelation 19. I believe it was Revelation 19:5, 19:4, around there, where it's talking about God basically wiping away all tears, which is a reference to Isaiah. So passages like that. Inspiration, it depends what kind of inspiration. We talked about Timothy earlier, God not giving us the spirit of fear, but a power and of love and of a sound mind. That's powerful. Inspiration, things like I've been kind of like meditating on Proverbs chapter 9 for a couple of weeks. That's all about wisdom, and just how wisdom is basically sets itself up to call those who basically want to come and get wisdom, and folly does the exact same thing and stuff like that. So those are a couple of different passages which I think are actually quite beneficial. Let's see, hopefully that helps. But yeah, it's funny, that's the kind of question where I know as soon as I come off the live stream, different verses and things will just come into my mind and be like, oh, you know what, this and this. But those are just some for the top of my head right now. Let's see. I think I saw an interesting one there. Okay, cool. So somebody's joining us. He says, okay, no, different one. Sorry. Does Isaiah 53 talk about Jesus? Yes or no? Before he continues. Well, I don't know of any Christian who believes Jesus is the Messiah, but doesn't believe Isaiah 53 is about Jesus. So, I guess I've kind of given you the answer. Yes, I believe, number one, Isaiah 53, starting really in Isaiah 52, as referenced it today, is about the Messiah, clearly. And that isn't contingent or like isolated to Christians either. Multiple Jewish, like pretty much, I can't say categorically that it was unanimous at the time, but Jews also clearly, if you look at all of this stuff in detail, unbiased, believe that Isaiah 53 is about the Messiah as well. So that's what I'd basically say. Hopefully that helps. Let's see. Matt Brown says, props for going for that fraud Marcus Rogers. Bro, keep exposing him. He didn't worship God, he's worshipping Trump. No, it's like, this is a funny, it's an interest, like this is an interesting and funny topic, right? It's what I was actually going to say in today's live stream was, ladies and gentlemen, it's funny, like, look, I was going to say we're in May, we're in June now. I was going to say, look, we're halfway into the year, right? 6 months in. And like, believe it or not, I'm still getting people commenting on my videos saying that Trump won the election. And this is crazy because you have people still today, like, if someone 6 months after the fact, 7-8 months after the fact, is still saying something which clearly is not true, how do you deal with it? But the whole Marcus Rogers situation is actually quite interesting because you get, I don't want to say you get a mixed bag. You don't get a mixed bag. You get some people who are like, don't make videos. You get other people that, like Mac Brown, are giving me props and all of those different kind of things. And the thing for me, really, I was thinking about this today. The thing about like Marcus Rogers is, and other people that I've done videos about in regards to this particular Trump situation, is pretty much the 3 people I mentioned in my videos were all people who said not only that Trump was going to win, right, but that Biden wasn't going to be president, wasn't going to happen. They didn't see it. God wasn't going to allow it, etc. And all 3 people said it in a different way. And yeah, like the thing about Marcus Rogers is the problem I see today is more so it's just as time goes on and he continues to have a certain stance, like if he just came out and said, you know what, he made a mistake or whatever, right? If he just owned it 100% and said, look, you know what, he said it, this is what he said, and just try to move on. But because he continues to, like, number one, like cover his track, so to speak, and act as if he didn't say certain things, which he clearly did, right? That's one of the big problems. But the biggest problem is just that the videos I watched him mention certain Bible scriptures, he's misusing the Bible, he's taking it out of context, and most people that probably watch his videos don't understand or know how he's doing it. So that's what I've got to say. And obviously, like I said in my recent video that I did about him, he still made, like, I watched this video a couple of weeks ago and he made the video a little while before that when I watched it, but he calls people out that make videos about him, but in many cases he's not specifically talking about who he's calling out. And again, he did a video, right? I recorded my recent video before he actually released this video that I'm talking about now, but last week he recorded another video, like just calling out people. This video he mentioned a couple of people by name and by face, and I'm like, I watched the video and I'm just like, I was saying, I can't remember who I was talking to. Maybe it was one of my brothers or whatever, but I was just like, I feel sorry for some people that listen to his videos, because in this video, like, he was literally saying, look how this person looks. This person looks funny in a snapshot, so that means they're demonic. And like, someone like, that's childish and it's just like kiddie. Like, that's what I'd say anyway. But yeah, like, you can't just look at someone or say this person looks a funny way, so that means they're demonically possessed, or they've got issues, or like that is poor logic, poor weak argumentation, right? You'll get laughed out of. Like, I'm not even this like someone great into logic or anything like that, right? I'm not. But you get laughed out of the building if your argument was, look at how this person looks. And for a baby in Christ who may watch these videos, they're gonna be like, oh, you're like, yeah, like they do look funny. But that's weak argumentation. When you're dealing with someone saying stuff, if you're gonna respond, you should respond. If we're Christians as well, respond biblically, in the sense of, this person said you said this about the scripture. Like, debunk what they said, or just accept it. You know what? Yeah, I messed up, and move on. But it's crazy. And it's funny because the people that will say certain things, that makes me realize, you know what? I need to do a video. So the last time we did videos, I did videos about the whole Trump thing, right? When the false prophecies were basically finalized from the stance I came from, right? About Biden not being president. I got a slew of comments at the time saying, look, you shouldn't be doing this. You can't speak publicly about all of this stuff. And what did that tell me? I got so many comments about it. I realized, you know what? I need to do some sessions on naming people from a biblical perspective and calling people out publicly. And I did 2 videos. And all I did was, with anyone who tried to bring a certain comment, I just posted the link to that video. Because these situations over the last year and a half now have made you realize that there's so many babes. And that's like, I always try to just think about babes, people that don't know better. You're going to watch my video, you're going to watch someone else's video, you're going to watch all of these different people's videos, and you don't know any better. So imagine if I came on a live stream and I was teaching the Bible and I was just misusing it. I would want a fellow Christian, or like a Christian, to say, you know what, no, like, he's misusing the text. And if I was misusing the text, I'd be like, okay, you know what? Yeah, I was doing it, misusing it, I was wrong, and just move on. I wouldn't start doubling down and doubling down and doubling down. This is where it gets crazy. But that shows you that there's so many people that need to hear and actually understand. And the fact is, God knows, and I say this all the time, if you want truth, God's going to get the truth to you. It's whether what you're going to do with it. And what I've seen over the last couple of months in regards to just some of the stuff Marcus Wood does, is suspect. But if you notice, like, I make videos, I don't go for certain stuff that's out there. Certain people say many things to me about him and other people, and I won't mention it because I like to deal in certainties. I like to deal in, you know what, he said this, and this was his context. I'm not taking him out of context, and this is my response. I don't want to make videos about Marcus Rogers and other people, right? But in a situation like this, certain times you have to make videos about certain people and hope that they basically change their ways. But that's the world we live in, right? But I guess the rant is over, as they say. Let's see. Cool. Next question. Mike Brown asks, do I think black people are the real Hebrew Israelites? I'm not, I don't know, right? There's people that make cases and say black people are the real Hebrew Israelites. The same black people who will say, look, they're the real Hebrew Israelites will talk about how the Israelites are spread abroad, right? So there could be different skin tones, etc. As a new, like, my stance typically is, just as a New Testament believer, it doesn't matter if they were darker colored, if they were lighter colored. You get people that talk about they're imposters over there in the Middle East, etc. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Like, I don't spend a lot of time really focusing on that, because, like, for a Christian who reads the Bible, that's, from my understanding, irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. If they were darker colored, fine. If they were lighter colored, fine. If they were in the middle, which most likely is what they were, right? Being Middle Eastern, right? You're not going to be too dark. You're not going to be too light. You're definitely not going to be like Caucasian, as you referenced it today. But at the same time, I don't think you'd definitely be dark skinned either. So that's what I'd basically say. From my perspective, that's what I generally say. But yeah, everyone's going to make a case for what they believe ultimately. But that's what I'd say. Um, let's see. Um, all right. Mr. Enigma says, Mr. Somebody says, does Jesus have any children? How do you understand that it's his seed from faith? Like, this is a reference to Isaiah 53, because Isaiah 53 says he'll see his seed. It doesn't have to be literal seed, right? That's the common view you're going to hear from like Messianic Jews, Jews that believe in Christ as the Messiah. The Hebrew word doesn't necessarily mean seed, etc. And there's strong cases that could be made which kind of just debunk the like rebuttal that, you know what, it talks about seeing seed, etc. Once you look into a lot of the sources, it's like it's about the Messiah. It's undeniable, right? It's whether Isaiah 53 is about Jesus. Like, how can I put this? I'll put it like this. Looking at all of the evidence, the debate isn't about if Isaiah 53 really and truly is about the Messiah, right? Like, Christians obviously believe Isaiah 53 is about the Messiah. There's so many references in the Zohar, which is Jewish mysticism, in the Targums, which is Jewish like commentary on the Old Testament, Isaiah 53 included. You've got what else? You've got multiple different things, multiple different sources. You've got Midrash, which is basically like more commentary. There's so much different stuff. You've got the Talmud, right, which Jews accept. There's so many sources. This is like, it's funny. And this is something that I mentioned this recently, like Jewish views on the Old Testament, all of that kind of stuff is something in recent months, one of the things this year I've kind of got into, right? And I'm still getting into it and going even deeper. But once as a Christian, you see, like, especially on a passage like Isaiah 53, how much source material there is, which proves that Isaiah 53 is about the Messiah. One would start scratching your head like, this is, which isn't a surprise. As Christians became much more familiar with arguments how to defend their beliefs, what happens? Jewish people, who obviously are not Christians, will basically change what they believe about certain things. And now all of a sudden, Isaiah 53 is not necessarily about the Messiah, an individual. Now it's about the nation of Israel, which has so many problems, right? So many problems. Mr. Somebody's asking, and he's not a Jew, just for the record, but Mr. Somebody's asking about the Messiah, about seed, right? We're talking about seed for one particular individual, right? How does that now translate? That gets even bigger, a bigger problem for those who think this is about a nation of Israel. Because if we're arguing, if some people are going to say, wait, hold on, the Messiah, Jesus, didn't have any literal children. Well, did the nation of Israel have any literal children? No, right? So, like, there's like, ladies, I'll just put it like this. I was surprised at how much source material we have as Christians, which is not even from Christians, from Jews, which supports the things that we believe. So that's what I basically say. So Abraham's here as well. Thanks for tuning in, bro. Hope you're doing well. Better late than never, right? That's what I'd say. Let's see. No problem, Mike Brown. Hope you're good. Let's see. So yeah, like, I don't obviously well, I've thought about this already. I'm probably going to recommend some books over time, right, in regards to passages like this and topics like this, because, ladies and gentlemen, as Christians, we need to know our Bibles first and foremost. And once we know more about our Bibles, we need to understand how to deal with arguments from different people who are going to challenge your faith, because they're going to challenge you in certain ways, and they will play on your ignorance. Not everyone, right? Not everyone's out there deceptive like that, right? But there are people, right, who have an agenda. which doesn't line up with the agenda you have. And we as Christians, I was saying this to my wife the other day, look, as Christians, we're easy targets in many ways because the Bible talks about Christians being loving and all of these different kind of things and forgiving, right? And people know this. So people try to go for us in certain ways, thinking that, you know what, we're an easy mark. And Christians can be very naive in certain aspects, but we have to be wise, right? Wise as serpents, harmless as doves. Matthew 10:16. Let's see. Mike Brown says if they think the election was stolen, Trump controls the military and he's going to get back in office soon. And look, you know what? If that was true, cool, fine, right? But that wasn't the message that any of these people that were giving these words before were saying, right? No one was talking about secret co-op movements. That was until after, when Biden obviously won the vote. So obviously once prophecies, words from the Lord have basically been proven false, been proven wanting, now the narrative shifts. I got a comment probably about a week ago about someone telling me about Chris Yoon doing some crazy stuff, trying to put it on the people for false prophecies. I haven't looked into that yet, but we'll see, right? Let's see. Let's see. And the funny thing as well, right? I can see Mr. Somebody's trying to go for it in regards to Isaiah 53. This is another thing I'll say, ladies and gentlemen. When you listen to the objections, like this is what you need to think about, right? When someone is bringing a rebuttal to something you believe, okay, that's cool. Listen to it. That's going to make you a better Christian, because you'll hear it and then it'll be like, okay, is this true? And because it is true, you're going to see an answer. We talked about this earlier on. When Jordan Daniels asked me, what are my favorite passages to debunk certain things or for apologetics or for this or for that? You won't know certain things until you're in a situation where it's like, oh, this, oh, that, etc. But that only comes with if you know your word, right? But like I said earlier, you know, like people talk about the seed, but that makes an even bigger problem for like Jews who will say it's the Israelites or something else. Like there's so many bigger problems for someone else, they may try and say. And that's ultimately what you'll find as you hear these arguments. Let's see. So I guess, yeah, I can see Mr. Somebody's asked about offspring again. So I've kind of answered that already. So maybe he's responding to me later on down. Let's see. Brandy says, all religions are very sketchy, but God's word will always prevail. And it's true, right? You're going to find holes in all different situations once you start pressing them and trying to put them under scrutiny. Let's see. Bugger asks, do I read any commentaries or books on theology? What would you recommend? In all honesty, what I like to do is not necessarily books per se. I actually do like to read, but I would say I prefer video more, which isn't a surprise. Many people like video more than books, but I do like reading. But I would just say, like, there's loads of different, even like, let's just think on a basic level, right? Because study, if you're going to get physical, it's going to cost money most likely, right? But like, let's say for example, like YouTube. If you're going to watch materials, commentaries, you've got multiple people who have done through the Bible volumes, book by book, verse by verse. Those are things which are good. If you've got a website like Bible Hub, Bible Gateway, they have a list of commentaries on most verses or most chunks of passages from different scholars, etc. When I was first, like in my early years of salvation, I used to use a program called eSword on my Windows laptop, and basically it's free on Windows. On Mac, it costs money, but it's free on Windows. So if you're using Windows, that'll be free for you. And you can basically download maps, you can download study notes, you can download commentaries, loads of different commentaries, right? So they give you a huge list of things. So those were some of the things I used just back in the day, as well as just voluminous teaching. So teaching exegetically, step by step through the Bible. There's multiple of those through on YouTube for free as well. You've got people that devote themselves to particular books, but that's what I'd basically say. There's so much resource today. The website I gave you already has loads of free commentaries, and YouTube has loads of step by step. And step by step is different because it's easier to misteach in a video where it's just one verse you're trying to teach from, or two verses, because you can kind of smear and obscure the context. When you're teaching exegetically through books and through verses, it's much harder. It's not impossible, people still do it, but because you're gathering context, it will help you a lot. And it's kind of like thematic as well, but that's what I'd basically say. And again, another thing that's important as well is topics as well. If you're learning topically, that might be a bit different. Then you may have to get into some books which are on that particular topic. If it's just straight through the Bible and stuff like that, there's a lot of good resources which are free on internet, and also you can pay for as well. Hopefully that helps. Let's see. Let's see. All right, gone to the bottom, scroll to the bottom of the chat. I can see Jordan Daniel says, any experience with the Amplified Bible? Recommend, don't recommend. Like, not serious experience. Obviously, I know what the Amplified Bible is. It kind of explains, it's self-explanatory what the Amplified Bible is. It amplifies what the Bible ultimately says. So I would definitely not recommend someone read the Amplified or a translation like that as their main Bible, right? Big no-no, because it's amplifying everything. You want to read a translation which is more of a literal translation, where it's trying to give to you what is like close to what's there in the original manuscripts, in the original language, right? So you want more so that kind of translation to read as your main translation. If you want to read it as like a side translation, a part-time translation, like a translation for like a devotion or something along those lines, then cool. But it amplifies, right? So just the mere nature of what the translation is, it can't be a translation which you read every day, like for your study. And there's something else I was going to say, but it's kind of gone. If it comes back, I'll basically bring it up again. Hopefully that helps. Let's see. All right. Mike Brown asks, Kevin Samuels is part of the man's got to be a high value man movement. What do you think of that movement? So from what I understand of the movement, I'm not fully like knowledgeable of the movement, right? The way I kind of saw it from what I was watching is I kind of just simplified it to he wants men to be successful, right? In simplest form, men should be successful. right? So from that perspective, I can agree, I can co-sign with that, right? I don't believe men or women, in fact, should be like wasters and lazy and all of those kind of things. We should work, right? And things along those lines. We should be trying to be as best as we can as possible. Now, beyond that, and this is something I realized as well, listening to him, like trying to read between the lines as well. He obviously does say a lot of things which are charging at women, but really like his like thesis I kind of gathered is he wants men and women to be the best they can be. That's what I kind of see. Now, when you start going beyond that, that's where I'm going to have to jump off the ship, because he's now going to go into certain things which I don't fully agree with. But just the mere nature of a man being successful, I agree with, right? We should all be trying to be successful in what we do. We should all be trying to get better every single day. So from what I understand of this, the high value man movement, etc., of being successful, yes, certain things like we talked about earlier on. He talked about what's the word? He talked about like basically cheating, a man being able to cheat and stuff like that, and a man having options. Those kind of things is where, like I said, I'd have to jump off the ship, because certain things go against just the biblical narrative contextually through the Old to New Testament. So that's what I'd say. Hopefully that helps. All right, Brandy asks, how can someone be more social? She is very shy, even with her extended family. She has no friends at all, but she would like to be friendly and allow the Lord to use her in other people's lives. So, number one, make sure you're praying about it, right? Number one, that's it. Pray about it. God, help me. Basically, the thing you asked, pray, commit that to prayer to God. He is faithful, definitely, and he will answer prayers. If you want to be used, God wants to be able to use everyone. So God will definitely use you in different ways. Pray about it. Secondly, you need to learn like how to be social. So it really depends what kind of person you are. If you're one of those people that doesn't mind putting themselves in awkward positions, which, like you said, you're shy, so you're most likely not. Some people just jump into the pool, as they say, right? Just to get their feet wet and acclimatize to that cold pool. Others who may be shy and stuff like that may say, you know what, that's too much. So what I would say is just like think about mirroring people who you know are social and you know are godly. So look at examples in the Bible of how people engage with people or people started conversations. I would say start with basic things. You could say, you know what, you're going to every day you go out somewhere, and just you're going to say, you know what, I'm going to say good morning or good afternoon or good evening to one person. And you may say, look, I'm going to say to one person, I'm going to ask someone about their day. Whatever it is, I'm just going to ask a random person, how was your day today? Are you having a good day? Something along those lines. Or you're going to smile at someone and things along those lines. Those things go a long way, but that's what I'd say. Another thing you could do is try and interact with people with things that you commonly agree with. So that's a good way to be social. So try and find people you can have conversations with about things that you like. So if you're a Christian, for example, you know what, like, what do you think about Jesus? Or do you believe in Jesus, etc.? These are different ways you can practice, and it will just become second nature. I wouldn't say I was necessarily shy, but I'm a more reserved person, just naturally. And it's funny because, like, as I got saved, I feel like it was salvation that kind of helped me, and even still to this day forces me to try and be more interactive with people. I'm the kind of person, like, I can be fine in a room and just relax by myself, but then at the same time, if we get onto a certain topic, like, you would think, wait, oh, this is a different person, because generally I can just relax and chill. I don't mind chilling, but then, like I said, at the same time we start talking about certain things, it's be like, oh, like, So he's not like just this person who just keeps to himself. He's not like this weird person or whatever, but that's how it is. You just have to practice it really and pray about these things. They'll help. But just some of the things I've said will definitely help you. Let's see. Cool. Let's do a couple more. All right, Brandy says she thinks it stems from her family not being too social with her growing up. She feels like she was emotionally neglected and was discouraged to make friends. Like, yeah, we've all got different situations, right? That we ultimately have to deal with. Yeah, it's like now the onus is on you. Now think about what you said, right? She said she feels like her family in the upbringing. Okay, cool, right? I'm not disputing that. That's cool. That may be true. Now, as you grow and get older, now it's on you, right? Our parents do multiple different things to us when we're growing up. Well, some good, some bad. And those bad things that they may have done to us, we have now the onus. Now it's on us to change things up. So if your parents didn't like surround you with people that were social and those kind of interactions, cool, but that's done now. We need to move on and we need to see, okay, cool, what can I do now which can help me get over this deficiency in my character? And don't like think about it as like, you know what, well, this is like a negative, I'm done, I can't change. Of course you can change, right? God can definitely help you transform every area of your life. So definitely just commit these things to prayer and it will definitely help. Let's see. Let's see. All right, Jordan Daniels says in John 14:28, what is meant by the Father is greater than I? So I talked about this earlier on. I've got a video on the particular topic. I don't believe that Jesus is there saying that the Father is greater than him, as if, you know what, he's debunking the Trinity or anything like that. All right, I mentioned this earlier on. If you go earlier in the passage, same word, Jesus says the disciples will do greater miracles than him. If we're going to be consistent, that would mean that the disciples are doing greater, better. You obviously have, we've talked about this before, you have, you can do greater isn't contingent on one particular definition. You can be greater than someone in your nature, right? We are greater than animals in nature. We talked about the image of God earlier. But you can be greater than someone in authority, right? For example, I'm a son, right? My earthly father is what? Greater than me. Why? Because he gave birth to me in that sense, right? Or we're both humans. So so he's not greater than me in regards to our nature. We're both humans, but he's my parent, right? So you think about it like that, there's different ways greater can ultimately be used. I don't believe he's talking about the nature, right? Many people just say, look, he's talking from an earthly perspective, which I don't disagree with, right? On earth, here in his limited body, the Father was greater than him. That's why contextually what he's talking about, he's in that whole passage from pretty much John 13 to John 17, he's talking about going back to the Father, which is where he ultimately came from, which in that sense, the theme does correlate, but that's what I'd say. It's not necessarily about your essence or your nature. It doesn't have to be about that. It can be about your role. It can be about your authority, etc. It doesn't have to be about the essence, what makes you who you are, etc. and stuff like that. So, but check out the video I did recently on the channel. It will definitely help. John 14:28. Let's see. I can see Mr. Somebody's getting into these rundown, late, old, tired Isaiah 42 arguments. We've been there, done that, Mr. Somebody. Like, let's not revisit old stuff which has been debunked 50 ways. Let's see. Isaiah 42 is clearly not about an Arabic prophet, quite clearly. You don't even have to do too much reading to understand that, just by reading it contextually. Let's see. Let's do one more question and then we can wrap it up tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully this has been a good session. Been fun. All right. Mr. Somebody says, who is the Holy One from Mount Paran? Like, ladies and gentlemen, right, this is this is funny. I've got a video on Isaiah 42 for anyone that's interested. Just to answer the question, right? Who is the Holy One from Paran? What Holy One from Paran? See, what Mr. Somebody's doing there is what many Muslims do. They presuppose into the text, right? What Mr. Somebody's doing is begging the question. He's asking, who's the Holy One from Paran? The Isaiah 42 doesn't say there's any Holy One from Paran. So if you don't know, right, how to deal with these kind of questions, like in this situation, a Muslim, for example, will think that the script that they've learned is actually effective. But Muslims don't read the Bible. They don't read it contextually. So when you say certain things to them a lot of the time, they just think, oh, you know what, you're lying, or you don't know what you're talking about. But I've had Muslims read Isaiah 40. I'm sure I've even had Mr. Somebody read Isaiah 42, right? And ask him, where does it say there's a Holy One from Paran? Because it doesn't say that. Let's see. Okay, so he's talking about Deuteronomy 33. Okay, I stand corrected. So the funny thing, ladies and gentlemen, is Deuteronomy 33 is even worse. Well, you can't even say it's even worse, but if you read Deuteronomy 33 and what Mr. Somebody's even talking about, right? It's talking about what God did. But again, because the Muslims don't read the Bible, they like contextually, they don't know these kind of things. But Deuteronomy 33 is talking about what God did. And the things which it mentions in Deuteronomy 33 are all mentioned previously in the Torah, right? When the Israelites came out of Egypt. But again, most Muslims haven't even read the whole of Deuteronomy chapter 33, let alone Numbers or Exodus or even any part of like seriously in Deuteronomy. So you'll say these things and it will just go over their head because they've been told that, look, he's the Holy One from Paran. This is Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, etc. But there's too many problems with these kind of these arguments. But yeah, I think we can end the live stream on that last bit of comedy from Mr. Somebody, right? Hopefully this was a good session for everyone that tuned in. Let me know in the chat section how it was. And just by God's grace, we can be back next week. Same time, same place. Feel free to tune in. Bring your questions and hopefully we can have a good session again. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day, your morning, your evening, etc. God bless.